Thanks. Afternoon. Can everyone hear me okay? Mic issues? Great. It's always nice to have a round of applause before you've even said anything. Makes me feel really nice and warm and fuzzy inside, especially since I've got some pretty big shoes to fill, because I know that you were all expecting, hoping to be hearing from the wonderful Sophie Miller, who unfortunately has got COVID, and so I've been bumped up to this slot instead. And that's a tough one to take, because at least in the marketing world, she is pretty famous, pretty well known, and I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that none of you have ever heard of me. So, yeah, but it's okay, we can do this. And actually, I've got to tell you, even if this whole talk totally goes to shit and you all spend the entire journey home talking about how much worse I was than Sophie would have been, I actually don't really care. I'm considering this conference a win already, because I got to spend a night in a hotel last night without my two small children. Yeah, thanks. I know. I actually got to have a shower by myself this morning. And I was in there for longer than 60 seconds. And no one set off the smoke alarm while I was in there. So that is a big win. Now, obviously, I'm hoping that it doesn't all go to shit and that you do actually find it interesting and helpful. But before we get into the content of the talk, I do just feel like we just need to take a minute to address this title issue. Let's be real. Who, when they were looking at the schedule and saw this title, thought to themselves, there's a good chance whoever wrote that talk is going to turn out to be a bit of a pretentious twat? Anyone? Because I'm not going to lie, I would have thought that if I'd have been you. I mean, it's pretty grandiose, you know, the 9 immutable laws of brand voice. I mean, Jesus, who am I, Gandalf? I mean, calm down. But the thing is, I kind of felt the need to have quite a grand, even over-the-top talk title, because I wanted it to be really clear what these 9 things are that I'm going to be sharing today. Or maybe more appropriately, what these 9 things aren't. Because I wanted to be clear that these are not just 9 thoughts that I've had about brand voice, 9 little musings that I thought maybe you guys might find helpful. They're actually much more fundamental than that. They're really more like 9 realities, 9 unavoidable truths about brand voice that I have come up against time and time again, working with all kinds of brands in all kinds of sectors, selling all kinds of things to all different people. Again and again, I have found these 9 things to be unavoidably true. And they're things that if you aren't aware of them, if you don't take them into account, then any work you do trying to develop your brand's identity, and particularly your brand voice, the articulation, the outworking of that identity, is going to be a lot harder than it needs to be. It's going to take a lot longer, it's going to cost a lot more, and ultimately it's going to be a lot less likely to be successful. So given that, hopefully you will forgive me the slightly grandiose title. But just in case not, here's a really nice picture of some dancing bears. Because it's just good to feel happy. It's just good to start in a good place, in a happy place. So can you do this? Can you stick with me? Forgive the grandiose title. Can you handle the 9 things? Are we ready? Yeah. Ooh, there's some great post-lunch energy. Cool. All right. Well, we're doing it. We're going. Okay. The first law. Having a tone of voice is not optional. It's inevitable. So there's a lot of areas of marketing where you can either do something or not do something, and it doesn't really matter. Or there's no right or wrong. So maybe your business has a podcast, maybe you don't. Maybe your company is on TikTok, maybe you're not. Maybe you run Google Ads, maybe you don't. It depends. It depends what your goals are. It depends what fits your strategy. You have to make a choice about what fits and what doesn't. Having a voice, it's not like that. There is no opt-out. There's no way not to have one, because when we talk about having a voice, brand voice, verbal identity, tone of voice, whatever you want to call it, really all we're talking about is the picture that your language is painting about what your company is like. The exact words that you're choosing to use to convey whatever your key messages are, what they're helping people understand, not just about what you do, but about what you're like, that's your tone of voice. That is the brilliance and also the complexity and the challenge of the English language. That's just how words work. There's the literal meaning of words, but we all know that when we talk, we're conveying much more than just literal meaning. There's all kinds of connotations and other ideas and images and things going on behind words. It's impossible to escape from that. So if your business uses words in any way, and I would love to talk to you afterwards if you don't, if your business is using words in any way, you will have a voice. You will be giving people an impression, whether you mean to or not, of what you're like as an organization. And the thing is, the bad news is, if you haven't done any work to make sure that your voice is good, there's a reasonable chance that it's bad. And those are your only two options. There is no, oh, actually, I don't think we'll bother with that next year. Let's put it on the agenda for 2025. You already have one. There's nothing you can do about that. You can't opt out. And so that's why this law is so important, because you have to know that unless you're willing to take the risk of having a bad voice, and by bad I mean either just confused, chaotic, inconsistent, indistinct, or worse, a voice that's actively giving people the wrong impression of your company, unless you're willing to take that risk, you are going to have to do something about it. You are going to have to do some work on it. I'm not presupposing what that work might look like. For a lot of people, it involves hiring in help from outside. That's why I have a job. But depending on how your team is made up, how big you are, what skills are within the team, it's possible that it might be something you can do internally. For some people, it's a huge job because where they want to be is really far from where they are now. Other people, it's more about it's a smaller thing, it's a smaller leap. So I'm not presupposing what the work is, but you are going to have to do it unless you're willing to take the risk that your voice is bad. Now, the upside to that bad news is that can often make it easier to persuade either the people around you in your team or the people above you, if you need to release some team time and some budget, can often make it easier to persuade them of the importance of that work, because you're not asking them to unlock time and budget to give you a new thing. You're asking them to unlock time and budget to make sure a thing you already unavoidably have isn't shit. And that tends to jog them along towards ticking a budget box. So that is an upside of it. But that's basically the takeaway is, unless you're willing to risk having a bad brand voice, you're going to have to do the work to make sure it's good. You can't opt out. It's inevitable, not optional. Law number 2 is that your voice needs to be derived from what you're like, not from what you believe. So in my line of work, I have seen a lot of brand guides, brand toolkits, brand identity documents, however they come. Some good, some bad. And I would say that of the bad ones, of the not very useful, mostly a lot of wanky bollocks, not going to help anyone in their day job kind, the problem with them, what makes them bad, tends to start in the same sort of place each time. And it tends to start with, at the sort of headline level, the kind of brand attributes, the sort of, this is who we are as a brand, this is what we're like as a brand, which is fine, that's a good, you need that as a foundation. But it tends to go wrong from there, because 9 times out of 10, this is what that list looks like. We've all seen this, right? Sure. And I want to be clear, I'm not knocking these things. These are totally great things for any business to aim to be. In fact, I would say surely every business should aim to be these things: honest, professional, high quality, reliable, people-centered, all good, all positive, fine. They are totally great organizational values. But my problem with them in this context is that they are values. They're not personality traits. And values tell you something about how you should act. They don't tell you very much about how you should talk. Let me give you an example. Let me think of a brand that ticks all of these boxes. The Ritz. I assume we're all familiar with them from a distance, if not having actually stayed there. So the Ritz, they tick all these boxes. Another organization that also fits the bill: building brands. Hands up if you think those two brands sound the same. Good work. Right answer. No, they don't. Ultimately, words like this, they're totally fine as brand values. Okay, maybe we could express them a bit differently. We could make them a bit more interesting. Totally fine as brand values, though, but they shouldn't be anywhere near your brand voice or brand identity, brand personality stuff. You need to go further. You need to do something better and different. And so here, actually, I am going to deviate just for a moment from my immutable laws line, and I'm just going to offer you a tip. This one is a tip, so you can take it or leave it. You don't have to follow it or else be beheaded. But I just thought it would be harsh of me to go really hard on what you shouldn't do without giving you any ideas or advice about what you should do. So here's my tip. When you are thinking about the best words to use to kind of encapsulate your organizational identity, you really want to be aiming for words that in and of themselves aren't either good or bad. They're just indicative of different types of personality. And my tip is a sort of quick test, quick shortcut to figuring out if the type of word you've chosen or words you've chosen is the right one. And the tip is this, that if the words you've got in mind, or the word you have in mind, is one that no brand in their right mind would want to be the opposite of, don't use it. So if we think back to our list, something like honest. Sure, we all know there are plenty of dishonest companies out there, but I'd be very surprised if there are any that are hoping that's how you'll view them. Reliable is the same. Flip that around. I just can't imagine that there are very many brands who are thinking to themselves, I really hope when people read our website, they come away thinking how unreliable we sound. No one's hoping for that. What you want are traits and attributes that, like I said, are not good or bad, but are just indicative of different types of personality. So something like cheerfully mischievous, maybe. A brand could very easily be the opposite of that, calm and forthright, or quietly earnest, maybe, a sort of approximate opposites, and that would be fine. There'll be nothing wrong with that. Neither of those is good or bad or right or wrong. They're just different types of personality, different types of brand. Similar with something like casually elegant, or feisty, or unreservedly chirpy. You come up with it, whatever fits your organization. But the point is, try and make them a bit more interesting than that list, a bit more specific. But really, that's the litmus test of if you're picking an attribute that someone, like just no brand is going to say, oh, I'll be the opposite of that, great, tick that box. You don't want that. You don't want that. So any traits when you're thinking of it, if you can run them past this test, that's a good start. That's a good place to go. But the key is, tip aside, take it or leave it. The key thing is the law, which is that as we said, it has to be based, your voice has to spring from your personality and not from your values. So don't think that when it comes to thinking about your organizational identity and your voice, that all that great work you did on brand values and that wonderful vision, mission, values statement that you've got, that's enough. Sure, it's a fine place to start. Your values are going to inform what your personality is like, but it's not enough on its own. You can't just lift those things, put them at the front of the document and go, great, that's a voice. Mainly because they're just not specific enough. Again, thinking back to that list, that top one, honest. So a good example of a brand that is quite honest in its marketing. Of course, they were going to make an appearance, Innocent. It wouldn't be a branding seminar if I didn't mention them at some point. They are very focused on, it's just juice, 100%, not from concentrate, no additives, no nasty stuff. This kind of theme of honesty would run through a lot of their marketing. But they do that in a very playful, quirky, light-hearted, almost childlike kind of way. That's their voice, that's their style. Whereas another brand that would have honesty kind of running through its voice would be someone like Monzo, the kind of disruptor in the brand industry. Again, very focused on saying there's a lot of dishonesty and confusion and jargon in the financial sector. We're the sort of plain speakers, the truth speakers. Honesty is a very big part of their identity, but their voice is very different from Innocence. It's much more kind of straight-talking, plain-talking, trustworthy, calm, not playful at all, and much more grown-up. So those words alone, they just won't tell you enough. Like we said, values tell you about how you should act, they don't tell you about how you should speak. So when you're thinking of words, use this as your litmus test, and you'll be much more likely to be guided towards words that will actually turn out to be useful for you. Law number 3. Your tone of voice has to be rooted in reality. So we just talked about in that last law the fact that your voice has to be based on your personality. It's kind of exactly the same thought for this law, but with the emphasis on a different word. Your voice has to be based on your personality. And by your, I mean your in the corporate sense, your organizational personality, your corporate personality. So developing a voice is not about thinking, oh, it'd be really great if our brand was XYZ, and building a voice around that, if that's not actually what your company is like. And it's also not about looking around and finding other brands that are doing really cool stuff and thinking, great, we need to talk more like them. It's got to be about unearthing what the real personality and what the exciting kind of unique and interesting and sort of forward-propelling kind of things in your business are, the things that make people want to work for you, the things that make people want to buy from you. We're delving into that and unearthing that and uncovering that. There's a lot of misconception I often find when people talk to me about what I do, of that it's almost about sort of painting some personality on top of an existing set of words. And I'm always saying to people, it's really not like that. And actually, although my background is as a writer and I love words and I love writing, that comes way further down the line. The brand voice stuff is actually, in the beginning, very little to do with words, and it's much more about going right back to basics of uncovering that brand identity, that real, authentic brand personality, and defining that and understanding that, and then drawing a language from that. It's definitely not about just painting something on over the top. It's got to be rooted and grounded in who you actually are as a brand. Now, it's worth saying that doesn't mean that there isn't any room for aspiration as a brand. So I would say actually quite a lot of the work that I do is often in the context of maybe a company going through a big rebrand. Maybe they've brought on a new CEO and they're making a lot of changes. Maybe they as a brand are sort of shifting position in their sector, or starting a new product line or something like that. And there is change, and as an organization they are changing. And so as they think about developing their voice, there is a little sort of aspiration piece of actually, this is what we're like at the moment, but this is where we're headed, this is what we want to sound like. And so they develop a voice in line with that. But the thing that's key about that is still in line with, if not exactly where the organization is now, where the organization is going, is at least bearing some resemblance to, and will, once they've made those changes, bear resemblance to what the organization is like. It's not a completely made up, completely manipulative thing. So it is important to know that actually if you, because I do get this sometimes, that if you as a marketer are maybe working for a business that is frustrating you because it is very old-fashioned or seems really out of touch, or it's just really slow or maybe really prickly or overly formal, brand voice will not fix that for you. You're going to have to either find a way to fix that somewhere else in the business or leave. Brand voice will not do that. You cannot just say, the business is kind of shit in all these ways, but hey, let's develop a voice like this, and this, and no one will know. Because, of course, we all know authenticity is such an overused term, but we all know that doesn't work. As soon as anyone has any real contact with your company and they see that you're not this personality that you've been putting out at the front, there's going to be a huge disconnect. It's not going to work. So brand voice is not a fix for other problems in the business. It's got to genuinely represent what the business is like. It's got to be rooted in reality. Law number 4. Your voice is actually more about the one doing the speaking than the ones doing the listening. This is kind of a counterintuitive one, actually. So my background is as a copywriter and a content creator, and I feel like I've spent countless hours trying to drill into business owners. It's not about you. It's not about you. It's not about what you want to say. It's about what your audience need to hear. And great, hopefully we're all sort of familiar with that kind of mantra. And when it comes to your messaging, when it comes to what you're saying to people, that is 100% true. I still stand by that. You do have to pay attention to what it is your audience need to know and understand about your products and services. You've got to get out of your own head, burden of knowledge, or you've got to be able to put that to one side and really engage with where your audience are coming from. So that is totally true. But when it comes to how you talk, so when it comes to how you say what you're saying, that actually really does need to be mostly you. I mean, the clue is in the name. It's your brand's voice. It's got to sound like you. We've just been talking about it. It's got to be rooted in your personality. And again, I've had this quite a few times with working with companies where, you know, it starts off right. They've obviously got loads of really great kind of audience research. They've got a great understanding of their audience, and that's brilliant, and you need that. But they can often lean so heavily on that and be trying to bring that so much into the brand voice development process that they're really essentially trying to work out, how do we talk like our audience, or how do we talk like they want us to talk? And I've got to tell you, that way lies madness, mainly because your audience will be a hugely diverse group of people. I mean, of course, they're going to have some key things in common, some key psychographic things in terms of the needs, the wants, the desires that have driven them to your particular product or service. Of course, they're going to have those things in common. But as human beings, as individuals, they're going to have a hugely diverse range of personalities and voices and ways of communicating. And so trying to replicate that, trying to sound like them or exactly like you think they want you to sound, will just result in a confused, chaotic, disoriented voice. And I think also it's a bit of a misnomer that in order to win people over, you need to sound like them. I mean, even just thinking about how we operate on a human basis, I know that loads of the people that I most admire or trust or respect or find entertaining or really want to learn from often have hugely different ways of communicating than my own. But what I'm drawn to is that they are good at what they do, and they're good communicators, and they're confident, and they know who they are, and they embrace that, and they go for that. That's what I'm drawn to. I'm not only interested in hearing from people who sound exactly like me, although I am disproportionately interested in hearing from people who also swear a lot. That just makes me feel more at home. So it's not to say that your audience, that it's not relevant at all to your voice. Of course, it is important to know your audience, and it absolutely is relevant to think about your audience's language in relation to your sector. So particularly thinking about things like jargon and subject-specific language, how much will they understand, what kind of level are you pitching at? Lots of really interesting stuff about looking about how your potential customers talk about your sector or your product or your service when you're not in the room. You know, looking at Reddits and subreddits and stuff can be often really interesting, or Facebook groups, and hearing the kind of language and lingo that people use about things. And there's totally worthwhile stuff there, so I'm not knocking it. But I guess what I'm saying is when it comes to your voice, that stuff is really only about 5%. The 95% is it's got to sound like you. It's got to be rooted in your real, authentic personality, and that's what it's got to sound like, and that's where it's got to come from. So don't be too distracted by your audience. Law number 5. Brand voice work is not only for the marketing team. So it's very easy when you start thinking about working on your brand voice to be thinking about the main places, the big places where your voice is going to show up. Things like your website, social media, blogs, maybe you've got a podcast, you know, the big obvious stuff, the main stuff. And that's fine. That's great. But one of the most important things in brand voice, as we've kind of already alluded to, is consistency. Because that is a big part of authenticity. Because actually, if you can't speak to people the same way across all of your communications, and I really do mean all, every possible place they might come across you or hear from you or engage with you or interact with you in any way, if you speak to people in one way on your website homepage, but then speak to them in a slightly different way when that 404 page pops up because a link is broken or a page is broken. If you speak to people in one way in the body of a great email campaign, but speak to them slightly differently in the little small print at the bottom, if you speak to people one way on social media and then in a slightly different way when they actually buy something from you and get the client contract through and read through the T&Cs, if you do that, that's going to be a huge disconnect for people. And actually, it's going to make all that initial stuff, all that big stuff, kind of feel like bullshit. You know, it's going to make them feel that actually that isn't really your organisational personality. It's sort of just a costume that you've put on. And then you go backstage and it's all revealed to be an act. It's kind of like, anyone remember old school, Wizard of Oz, Judy Garland, merrily skipping down the yellow brick road in search of the great and powerful Oz, and she is pretty pissed when she finds out that it's just a kind of kooky old guy behind a curtain. She's not happy. Don't do it. Don't Wizard of Oz your customers. They don't like it. But so if you want to avoid that, if you want to make sure that you are genuinely wearing that authentic personality consistently across all of your communications, the big and the small, the ones that people see all the time and the ones that they see very infrequently, the ones they see first and the ones they see last, if you want to maintain that consistency, then it has to be something that goes beyond the marketing team, because while most of that big stuff probably sits with marketing or comms, maybe sales, loads and loads of that other stuff doesn't. I don't know how everyone's organizations are made up, but there's a high chance, I'm sure, that plenty of content is coming from HR, from ops, from program developments, from product developers, from fundraising. I don't know what your organization is, but there's a lot of teams, a lot of places, a lot of people. There's going to be all kinds of different content coming from all different kinds of places. Even things like, I don't know, the sign that goes up in your office building when the toilet's out of order. Who's writing that? You know, it's got to go through everything. And so if you don't make sure that every single person in the organization really gets what the brand voice is about and is really on board with it and engaged with it, then you are just not going to get that consistency. You're not going to get that permeation that you need. Now, there's no question that the marketing team will definitely be the main sort of instigators and drivers of the brand voice work. You're likely to own that within the organization and be the ongoing champions of it. But it has to be something that you spread beyond the marketing team. It's not just some little pet project that you guys do over here and tick the boxes that no one else ever really needs to know. I'm not saying it's easy. And I'll talk a little bit about the end about some various resources and things I've got to maybe help you out with that. It's definitely not the easiest thing to get everyone on board, but you have to know from the outset that if you don't try, if you don't tackle that, taking it beyond the marketing team, you're just not going to get it to saturate all of your communications in the way that you need to for it to be effective. Law number 6. Sorry, just going to drink. Law number 6, brand voice work will not make bad writers good. So, obviously we've just been talking about the fact that you do need to take your brand voice work and brand voice thinking outside of just the marketing team. So therefore, out to a whole bunch of people and a whole bunch of teams who may well not be natural writers. And that's true. You do need to do that. But at the end of the day, brand voice work is not designed to help people who don't know how to write learn how to write well. Brand voice work really is about helping people who already know how to write well learn how to write well in a particular style. So obviously, given the previous law, obviously it's important to do, and I think it is something that actually going through the brand voice process and doing training and getting people outside the marketing team on board and getting people excited about it and trying to get them feeling confident and on board with using the voice, it's totally a worthwhile thing to do. And I think that it will, it does, I've seen it generally improve the overall writing abilities and interest of the wider teams, mainly just because most people, unless you're in a writing-heavy function, most people haven't actually thought very much about the way they write since school or maybe university. And don't get me started on how many terrible writing habits that can instill in you. So you are likely, by going through the process of brand voice development, you are likely to grow people's abilities in writing generally. But don't expect it to do more than grow them a little bit and bring them up to a sort of basically good level. Going through brand voice development work is not going to make Janet from accounts the next Shakespeare. It's just not going to do it. It's not going to suddenly give you like 50 new brilliant content creators and you can just go, great, who even needs a marketing team anymore? You know, the IT guys will handle it. It's not a contradiction in terms, I think, to say that yes, it's absolutely important for your voice to run through every piece of communication and therefore everyone needs to know about it. And yet to also say not all pieces of communication are created equal. That actually there are some pieces that are bigger, that are more important, that have a bigger job to do, that are seen more often by more people, or are seen at a more key point in a customer journey, perhaps. And for those pieces, you are still going to need talented, experienced, dedicated writers and content creators. So it's just kind of holding those two laws in tension. Don't keep it just within the marketing team. Make sure everyone knows what they're doing, or else you won't get the consistency and the pervasiveness. But equally, don't be fooled by that into thinking that then, great, anyone can create great content all the time. It'll be fine. You know, brand voice doesn't magically make everyone a brilliant writer. You still need to have that strong copywriting and content creation function, whether it's in-house or freelancers or whatever. Law number 7. So a great brand voice is more than simply the sum of a lot of great copy. So I would say that of the clients that I work with, they fall generally into sort of 2 main categories. There's one category where they come to me and it's just pretty obvious to everyone all around that they really need some help. You know, their comms are in absolute state. They know it. I can see it. Everyone knows it. It's a huge problem. Fine. Easy. Great. But there's a second lot, which is sort of more interesting often, where obviously they recognise they need a bit of help. That's why they've come to me in the first place. But they often come feeling that they just need a little bit of help. You know, we're almost there. We think we've pretty much nailed it. Like we've got a great website. We had a copywriter come in and do it for us. Really sharp, snappy. We've got a brilliant social media team. In fact, this great new intern, he's hilarious. Like the tweets are bringing everyone in. We're loving it. We've got some cool product descriptions. Like it's all good. It sounds great. So I think we just need a little bit, just a few little tweaks, and then we're there. And often they turn out to be the ones that have the most work to do, the furthest distance to travel almost, because the thing is that often what they've got is not anything even remotely resembling a brand voice. What they've got is just a series of nice sounding bits of copy. But actually those different bits of good writing all sound good in very different ways. And often they don't even sound good in ways that reflect the company, what we were just talking about, and rooting your voice and your personality and your identity. And I mean, to really understand this law, I think you actually kind of have to go back a couple of paces and sort of unlearn something quite fundamental, which is that actually, when it comes to copy writing, there actually isn't really any such thing as good or bad in some objective sense. It's totally, totally dependent on context. Something that is really, really good in one context, and you look at it and you go, oh, that's a great bit of writing. If you tried to use it in another context, could actually be really, really quite bad. So I really like Apple. I have an iPhone. Sorry, I'm part of that tribe. And I like a lot of the ads that they run. I'm not going to lie, I like their older stuff better than their new stuff, but that's a separate conversation. I think they are really good, or they have been masters of sort of this short, snappy, just really emotive, like, brilliant, some great lines in there. So I love a lot of what they do. I love a lot of their ad copy. But I wouldn't put that tone to work if I was advertising funeral services. Probably. Don't know. We'll see. Maybe I'll try it one day. I talked already about Monzo. I am a big fan of their style as well, very straight talking, down the line, quite plain speaking. I think it's been great for them in their sector, really disrupting the industry. It's very different for everyone around them. There's lots of great stuff there. But actually, I really wouldn't use that voice if I was working for the Savoy, trying to encourage people to come to afternoon tea. Forget the copy. Obviously, the copy would be different, but that tone, you couldn't pull that across. And so it's just this idea of, like Apple have got a great voice or great copy. And you're like, well, yeah, they have for Apple, but it's not great in some objective sense. There's nothing about it that means this is good versus something else that is bad. It's totally dependent on the context. And again, I get quite a lot of, when I'm in conversation with people or often at events like this, and people sort of saying, oh, can you just have a quick look like at our website? Do you think, is our brand voice any good? Like, where are we at, whatever? And aside from, obviously, my massive hatred of, like, all contractors always being asked to just do something for free. Leaving that to one side for a moment, I'm sure none of you would ever do that. The main thing that I find out about that, and I just say to them, is that I can't tell you at a glance if your brand voice is any good or not, because I don't know anything about your company. I don't know what your personality is like. I don't know who your audience are. I don't know what your goals are. I don't know how you want to come across. If I don't know any of those things, any of that context, I can't just look at it and see at a glance if it's good or bad, because it's totally dependent on the context. So it's just really important to be aware of this, that it might be easy to feel, well, you might be in one of those two categories. It might be easy to feel, oh my God, everything's a mess, our comms are a total mess, like we really need some brand voice work. Okay, fine, possibly you do. But it also could be very easy to think, well, actually, loads of our stuff is really well written, it's pretty slick, like we've got some great copywriters on the team, I think we're pretty set. When actually, brand voice is more than that. It's more than just the sum of lots of nice bits of copy. It's got to be bigger than that. You've got to have copy that sounds good in a way that's authentic and true to you. So not just good in like it sounds like Apple, but you're not Apple. So it's got to be good in a way that's authentic. And it's also got to be good consistently. So it can't just be that Twitter is good because it's hilarious and quirky and your website is good because it's serious and authoritative. There's a huge disconnect there. So yes, those bits might be good in isolation, but they're not enough to bring you a solid, a strong brand voice. So it's more than just the sum of a lot of great copy. We're closing in, just 2 more to go. Law number 8. It doesn't mean you don't need great copy. So this one sounds like a bit of a contradiction. It's really just sort of the flip side of that other one. So yes, just lots of great copy on its own doesn't mean that you've got a great brand voice. And equally, having a great brand voice doesn't mean that you don't still need to work on your copy. So I also have had this quite a few times, that people get very excited about, like, great, we've done all this work, we've developed our voice, we've got this brilliant toolkit, we've got loads of ideas, we've got our wonderful list of traits that are actually genuinely really good traits, and we know how we sound, we know what to do and not to do, words to avoid, words to use, here's all our examples, like, this is brilliant. The copy's basically just going to write itself. Fire all the copywriters immediately, we're good to go. When, again, that is just expecting too much. It's asking too much of brand voice work. It's not going to do that for you. Now, unquestionably, I think doing brand voice work will make it more likely that you will have good copy, or maybe doing brand voice work makes it more likely that the copy you do produce will be good, but it doesn't do the work for you. It doesn't magically make that good copy appear. The analogy that I most like to use is that it's sort of like decorating a room. So if you imagine that you moved house, maybe, you've got a totally blank canvas to start with, you're thinking, okay, what do I want my lounge to look like? If you're starting totally from scratch, a completely empty room, and you ask 5 people to pick some things to go in your lounge, one person to pick a sofa, one person to pick a lamp, one person to pick the paint colour for the walls, one person to pick a table, who knows what your lounge might look like? They've got so many options at their disposal. Different colours, different styles, different eras, different materials. Just, it's almost overwhelming, the number of possibilities of how you could decorate that lounge. Whereas if you make a few key decisions, if you say, actually, I really want bright colours, I want a lot of block colours, and we're going to go for a sort of 70s vibe, maybe, and I want a lot of plants, and our dominant colours are going to be orange and yellow, and we want a lot of wood, no metals. If you make some of those key decisions, if you say, do you know what, we're going to go monochrome, we want really sleek, really elegant, no colours, let's use lots of glass, whatever your particular dominant theme is, if you make some of those calls and you choose those parameters, and then you ask 5 people to choose something for your lounge, sure, there's still a bit of variety, but they're much more likely to choose something that actually fits with the decisions that you've made and the aesthetic that you want. And it's exactly the same with brand voice, that if you've got a whole bunch of different people writing content for you, then most of them are just going to write that content in their own style, in their own natural way of writing. And so all these different bits of writing from different parts of the company are most likely to sound quite different. Whereas if you've got a brand voice guide, a toolkit, you've got this clear sense of this is who we are, this is what that means for how we sound, this is the outworking of that, then yes, there's still room for a little bit of creativity, a little bit of interpretation around that, but you're much more likely to get things that are at least in the ballpark of where you want to be. But the point of the law is that basically the brand voice work is like making those key decisions about your aesthetics. It's not buying the furniture for you. So you still have to do that. Again, it's in that thing of not expecting brand voice work to do more or to be more then it can. So yes, you need it, you need to set those parameters, but you then actually do need to buy the furniture, you do need to create the content, you do need to write the copy. That's not just going to magically do itself. You can't put enough stuff in the brand voice guidelines that then you can just copy and paste forevermore and it'll be fine. There's still work to be done there. I'm feeling overall that these rules are a bit depressing, actually. Sorry. I'm basically just constantly going, by the way, you thought it could be this. No, it's not, it's this. You thought you could do this. You can't. Sorry. I just feel like, better that you hear it now from me in a safe space rather than when you spent money and time and you get to a point where you think, shit, we've really ballsed this up. So I'm trying to help. Right. Woo, home stretch. Last law. Your voice is actually at its best when no one notices it. So this is also kind of a counterintuitive one as well. I think it's really easy when you work in marketing to just get very bogged down by just cool, exciting things that other big brands are doing. And, I'll take responsibility here. We do it to ourselves. I've name-checked Innocent and Monzo, and, they're the ones that get mentioned. Oh, what have I done? That was an error. Hello. They're the ones that always get... How did this go on? They're the ones that always... Is that better? Fine. They're the ones that always get a mention in these kind of seminars. And, if you're on like LinkedIn or anything like that, I know my feed is kind of flooded with, pictures of like this cool new ad that's come out. And there's a lot of kind of almost worshipping at the altar of cool marketing that's been created by big brands. And sometimes that's fine. There's often a lot to learn from really successful campaigns. That's fine. But it's very easy to just kind of feel that that's the goal, that having this really cool, edgy, amazing voice that everyone talks about and that people post about and that marketing ninjas include in their PowerPoint presentations and that some wanky influencer posts about on LinkedIn. That's the goal. That's what you're aiming for. But it's not. It's really not with brand voice. The whole point of developing your voice is to make a connection with people, to show them something of who you are so that they've got something to connect to and to cling on to in a sea of at least probably 100 other brands that offer pretty much exactly what you offer. So the point of brand voice is connection. It's not to get noticed. It's kind of like when I go to the park, which I do more often than I would choose, with my children. So my little boy is 3.5, and he inevitably, just randomly makes friends with some other child at the park, and they start playing together, and so almost as inevitably, you end up chatting to the parent, usually the mother of that other child. And, it starts off pretty sort of generic, how old is your child? Do you live around here? How many stitches do you have in your vagina? Casual park chat. But pretty soon it kind of, you go on to... talking about work maybe and childcare and like, oh my God, how difficult is childcare to find? And I mean, flipping out. I just had my second child at the end of last year, and clearly I should have put her name down for a nursery before she even existed as a human if I actually wanted a chance of getting her into any nursery in our area. It's been an absolute nightmare finding something. But hey, we finally found someone, thank goodness. But oh my God, they're so expensive. Childcare costs a fortune. And the thing is, you want to do it. You want to be back at work, especially after months and months of mind-numbingly boring maternity leave. You're desperate to get back to your job because I love my kids. Of course I love them. They're amazing. But I want actual adult conversation with humans that do more than just make noises and drool. Although some adults I know also do that, but whatever. And so you love it and you're back to work and it's great, but then you've got the money and you've got the guilt. You love your job, but then you're dropping off your children to spend all day with strangers, and is that the best thing for them, and what's going to happen in their future? And just the mental load of having children and the juggling and the time and all the things to think about, and you spend all day basically just loading and unloading the dishwasher, and it's so stressful, and we've made all this progress, and we've come so far, and women are so equal now, but men just don't seem to have the same worries or the same problems, and it's all on me, and I've got the juggle, and it's a nightmare, and I love my kids so much, but oh my God, I just need a really fucking massive nap. That was just for example, that wasn't based on anyone. But my point is, when you're having those conversations in the park, as I do, you're not analysing those conversations, you're just having them, and they're either good or they're not. I'm not overly thinking about how exactly that mum in the park is talking to me. I'm just either enjoying the conversation or I'm not. I'm either picking up that mum, scoring her number, organising another play date so the ranting can continue, or I'm judging her for the fact that she's been to a baby-led belly dancing class, whatever the actual fuck that is, and I'm avoiding that park forevermore in case I bump into her. And so there is a point in all this. And so that is why this law is important. Because at the end of the day, the whole point of brand voice stuff is to build a connection. The whole point of bothering with all of these laws, all of this chaos, this hard work, all of these negative things that I'm telling you, the whole point of putting that energy and thinking into developing a language that really tells people something about who you are and what you're like is so that you can make a connection. Ultimately, it's about giving people a window into your organization and what you're like. And windows aren't for looking at, they're for looking through. Boom, we did it. Woo, 9 laws. Thanks. Don't applaud just yet. I'm not done yet. You're not done with me. You can't get rid of me that easily. No, I'm nearly done. I just am going to say, if you want to get your phones out and scan that, or if you want to just take a picture or make a note, my website, bethanyjoy.co.uk/BB, then what you will find there that you might hopefully find useful, in addition, of course, to the standard follow me, like me, get my emails, is also a copy of the slides. So in case you want to remind yourself, in case you haven't already committed those 9 laws to memory, and you want to remind yourself of them, you will find a copy of the slides there. But the main thing that you will also find is a paper that I wrote a while ago, which is called something like 5 numbers that will clinch your case for brand voice work. And basically, it's just a recognition that lots of the people that I speak to, and especially once I've delivered the sort of bad news of, oh, by the way, you can't not have a brand voice, you have to have one, then do find themselves in the position of really needing to do some work and some thinking about that, whether that's a huge project involving external people or just something you do internally. A lot of people find themselves in the position of needing to do that. But obviously there's a task to be done in terms of convincing your team and your bosses perhaps to invest time and money into that. And so what you'll find there is a little sort of collection of stats and stories designed to help you make the case for why brand voice work is important and worthwhile. So hopefully you will find that useful. But thank you very much for putting up with me, and I'm sorry again that I wasn't Sophie.
Bethany Joy. We'll now have a half-hour remission. If everybody wants remission break.